Excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me.
Good morning to everybody. We're just waiting for a couple more attendees to come on. I'm going to ask Mark just to welcome everybody that's already arrived. We've already got a couple of attendees on, but we still are waiting for some more of the attendees to log in.
All right. Thank you very much, Jared. Welcome, everybody. Those that have already joined us, thanks for being punctual. We do know that there is high usage of Zoom at the moment. And because of that, some people might even be having a few gremlins in joining us. So we'll give them a minute or so, and then I think maybe in about a minute from now, Jared, if you can give me the thumbs up, and then we'll continue. Maybe while we're waiting, You'll see that at the bottom of the slide, there are two of us that are going to do the presentation. The one is Mel Kuster, sorry. And I can see Mel's smiling because I made a mistake with her name. And then the other individual is me. And if you look at it, she's far better looking than I am. So you can focus on that picture in the meantime. And obviously, I'm going to ask you, as we go through the process, write down thoughts, ideas that you have, which if you want to, you can ask us at a later stage. And maybe not even on the webinar, if you want to chat to us independently or individually on the other side. All right, Jared, I don't know how, I think that could probably be about a minute.
Yeah, I think let's give it 1 or 2 more minutes. We still haven't got, there's still quite a few people that have registered that haven't gotten in yet.
Okay. All right, but I don't want to wait too long because it's not fair on those people that have
just give
logged
it to
on.
5 past, another minute or so.
Okay, fine. Excuse me.
Okay, let's go for it.
All right. Once again, welcome everybody. And thank you very much for being online. Just a few things so that we can get the housekeeping out the way. The first thing is that you'll see a couple of house rules on the left-hand side, and I'll go through them very quickly. You are on mute, but you can interact via questions and chat box. So please make use of the chat box as well as the questions which you can put through. Now, Mark and Mel, so that's myself and Mel, are facilitating the session, and Jared is moderating it in the background. As I mentioned, we'll collect comments and questions and provide you our perspective relative to that. A recording will be made of this, and we'll get a copy of that recording, a link of that to you within the next 24 hours. And then you'll see the last point says, because of high Zoom usage, you might get bumped off. You can re-enter using the same link. So we've entered a new era, not only here in South Africa, but in the world. And because of that, everybody's trying to get comfortable working from home. And in fact, I was listening to something from Genos International yesterday about working from home and some of the interesting facts. In fact, it was on Wednesday. But you haven't come to look at the house rules. So let's look at some of the agenda. On the right-hand side, you'll see it says challenges, polls, and recommended solutions. And Melanie is going to share with us some of those challenges, which every single one of us are experiencing. And so I'm going to stop my PowerPoint and I'm going to stop sharing and hand the time over to Melanie. So Melanie, over to you. All right, Melanie's on mute still.
Good morning, everybody. A little bit about myself. I am a biomedical scientist by training. I'm also the technical director at a company that manufactures infection control products, so surface disinfectants, hand sanitizers, instrument reprocessing products, etc. I am an ISO 13485 certified medical device auditor and an ISO 31000 enterprise risk assessor. So basically, when I look at a scenario the scientist in me likes to understand why things are happening. The risk assessor in this tries to understand where things are coming from. So basically what I'd like to interact with you about this morning is COVID-19, the situation that we find ourselves in as a result, and really the impact that it's going to have on yourselves and your businesses, both in terms of going into the shutdown period now, and that's probably more on a personal level, as well as when we get to the point when we open businesses and continue life as normal. I've pitched it very much at an understanding level, not at a very technical level, but please feel free to ask questions, and if you'd like to ask questions about your specific industry, I'm very happy to take them at the end. So we're just going to start with a little video. This video I use when I do healthcare practitioner training. It's called If Saliva Were Red, and what they've done in this video is they have dyed the saliva in the person's salivary glands red, and it's performed in a dental facility, and they're performing just a basic oral hygiene procedure. If you just want to watch, I'll interject into the video with points to look at, and then once the video is finished, I'll show you then the significance for COVID-19. I'd like you just to take notice of everywhere where the red is landing. Now this patient chart is going to leave the treatment area. And those instruments are going to go to a different area of the facility where they're going to be reprocessed and thereby expose the rest of the facility. That gauze remains in the tub for use on the next patient. Okay. With regards to that video, that's all we're going to watch now. And you're all probably wondering at this point, what relevance does a dental video have on us? But in light of COVID-19, it's a very, very good training video to show you exactly how things that are spread by droplets, which is how COVID-19's mode of transmission is spread, actually then moves throughout a facility, moves throughout a business, moves throughout your home, and can be spread in large groups of people. You can see it's a touch-based thing, so everything that the person's touching, when there's saliva that's been exposed to it, that the red then lands up on those surfaces, can be moved throughout different areas. And also the close contact between people. So if you notice at the beginning of the video, the saliva that was spreading up onto the dentist's face, that's also what happens in large groups of people, especially when the personal space bubble is actually compromised. So if we look at what is COVID-19 now, I'm actually quite fortunate in that so much has been spread in the media about COVID-19 that most people have a basic understanding of what it is. So I'm not going to delve into too much detail here. What I am going to say is that COVID-19 is an envelope virus. We know this comes from the coronavirus family. Now, viruses in general don't survive very well outside of the host. And the reason for this is they don't produce their own energy, which makes your normal viral survival time on a surface generally about an hour. As soon as the moisture that it's been spread onto the surface dries out, that virus can no longer survive and therefore it dies itself. What we're finding with COVID-19 and what is being shown is that it doesn't quite conform to this typical survival pattern, in that its survival time is between 4 hours and 9 days, which is much longer than your typical virus on any given surface. And that's what's exacerbating the spread of the disease at the moment, and also why the processing of your facility, of your factories, of your offices, etc., from the beginning of your shutdown period to the end of your shutdown period is very important in order to stop the spread. And that's one of the things I'm going to touch on again later. Viruses in all categories mutate easily and often. What we know about coronavirus itself is that there are about 30 different strains of it. And we've already, if I have it correctly, on COVID-19, we already have about 18 strains of COVID-19 that are rearing their heads and that they've discovered in different parts of the world, because the virus itself is mutating and adapting to the environment that it finds itself in. The drugs that are generally used in a particular country are not always the same. The disinfectants, the antiseptics, those all differ, and the viruses then adapt and mutate in order to survive the conditions that they find themselves in. The other thing about COVID-19 is that it has a very, very high virulence. Now, what this means, and I'll give you a quick demonstration of it here. These are photographs of bacterial cells taken with an electron micrograph. So if you look in the top left-hand corner, those are 2 cells at minute 0. Top right-hand corner, those same 2 cells 30 minutes later, when conditions are right for them to multiplicate. Bottom left, 60 minutes later. Bottom right, 2 hours later. And this one is that same photograph 4 hours later. Now, what that shows is the rate of bacterial multiplication on a surface when you have conditions of moisture, warmth, and a food source. Now, what we generally know with viruses is that their rate of multiplication far exceeds that of bacteria. Some viruses are about quadruple that. Some viruses are even further than that. What we know about COVID-19 is that it has a very high virulence rate, which means it multiplies very, very quickly when conditions are favorable. And that is what's creating the infective rate, and then also has a relatively high mortality rate in terms of viruses, and that is what is making it so dangerous. Now, what is the chain of infection? And this is something that is very, very critical for each individual to understand, as well as for businesses to understand, so that they can help protect themselves and their staff members. So if we look at the chain of infection, where do we actually start? We start with a susceptible host. Now, a susceptible host is anybody whose immune system is not functioning at 100%. Now, any individual generally functions with an immune system that at best is about 90%, because we're always exposed to things that attack our immune system, and our immune system has to deal with them. If you then add exacerbating factors, things that happen in normal life, for example, stress levels, fatigue, malnourishment, smoking, sunburn, anything like that, even outside of exposure to other diseases, will cause your immune system to take a dip of about 30%, which means your average human functions with an immune system that at best on any given day is functioning at about 70%. When we're exposed to other factors, endurance events, etc., your immune system can take a further dip. And when we are then exposed to a disease, you get another 30% reduction, which means if you look at that in any given individual, your immune system, when faced with something like COVID-19, which is a virus which has a very high virulence rate and multiplies very, very quickly, you only really have potentially between 60 and 70% of your immune system. And if you think of them like your army, you only have 60 to 70% of those out there to go and fight the multiplication of these viruses within your body and to stop it becoming infected. Now, when the virus multiplies too fast for the 60% capacity that you have, you then end up being an exceptionally susceptible host. So the first critical take home from the information I'm going to give you today is that one of the things that we can do for ourselves and our employees is to actually educate them about what makes them susceptible host, what the things are that actually affect their immune system. And that old adage of taking care of yourself is really one of the best ways that you can equip yourself in order to come out of the other side of this pandemic with your health intact. The next thing that you need is sufficient volume of the microorganism. Now, if you consider that your immune system functions exceptionally well and that it has been protecting us for literally hundreds of thousands of years, you'll see that our immune systems are quite adept at actually countering viruses, bacteria, fungi, etc., all these pathogens when they're in low levels. The problem becomes when we become exposed to them in high levels. And that is exactly what's happened in COVID-19. Because it multiplies so quickly, what we're finding is that, and especially when we're exposed to somebody who is symptomatic, we're exposed to very high levels of the virus on any given surface and in any given contact with another human being. And this means that in general, whenever we're exposed to it, there is sufficient volume of the microorganism that even when our immune system is functioning at its best possible level, there's not enough capability to actually stop that infection from taking hold. We then need a portal of entry through which the microorganism can enter the host. Now, human skin and animal skin for that matter is actually a very effective barrier against infection. And if you think back over the course of your life, you will realize that whenever you get infections, whenever you get disease or illness, it's generally linked to a break in that intact skin. So it's an open wound that becomes infected. It's a respiratory cold, nasal passages, throat infection, ear infections even. We very rarely ever get infections of your deeper organs because it's much more difficult for the organisms to enter to those areas and infect those particular areas of your body. Where COVID-19 takes a jump over many other pathogens is that it has an additional portal of entry, which is through your eyes. And that is one of the things that is exacerbating the spread, because people are relying on facial masks to stop the spread and not changing their behavior. So what's happening is they're wearing the facial mask over their mouth and they believe that they're protected, and then they're still rubbing their eyes with saliva and contamination from other surfaces on their hands. And that's why, for me, as a scientist in particular and as a risk assessor, it's so important to understand the tactics of the enemy that we're facing, essentially, and that we don't just take the measures at face value. So we don't take the wearing of face masks as it's going to be our protection. Yes, it is a step, but it's not going to protect you entirely. And unless people are educated to that fact, we're going to continue to see the rampant spread of this disease globally. Now, if you have all three of those things in a row at the same time, you will result in an infection. And this is what we're seeing worldwide, is that stress levels, the modern lifestyle is enough on its own to make us susceptible to COVID-19. We're exposed to massive volumes of these whenever we come into contact with an infected person. And because the portals of entry are common breaks in intact skin, it's your mouth, your nose, and your eyes, we're seeing the infection rate skyrocket worldwide. Now, what must we do to stop it now? And these are pitched at a very personal level. If every single individual in an organization takes responsibility for their actions, we can actually stop the spread, and we can do something to protect ourselves and others. So the biggest fact that we've all, especially in South Africa now, been exposed to and worldwide is social distancing. And the reason for social distancing is essentially to flatten the infection curve. Now, if you look at this very simple graph that's provided by the CDC, you will see the two different infective curves. Both will happen, but through social distancing, what you can see is it drops the peak of that curve down to a level where your healthcare system can cope. And that is what is trying to be achieved through social distancing. We're not saying that less people will get the infection through social distancing. That's not the case at all. What we're saying is that more people will get it, but they will get it over a slower period of time. And then our healthcare system will be able to cope. And if our healthcare system copes, then we will also lower the mortality of the disease. The next thing, and we've all had this drummed into our heads over the last 3 weeks, potentially even since January when it first became common knowledge, was washing hands. Now, in infection control training, and I've been doing this for 14 years now, this is a cartoon that I have used for 14 years. And everybody has a look at it, and everybody has a good laugh. And I say, imagine if that bell and those lights went off every time somebody came out of a bathroom who didn't wash their hands. They would never ever stop. And the flashing of those lights and the ringing of that bell would be a visual reminder to them, actually, you're doing something that's not in the best interest of yourself and the public. So turn around and go and rewash your hands. And for 14 years, everybody laughs and everybody ignores what I'm saying. And all of a sudden, in the last 3 months, we've been exposed to the fact that actually washing hands is critical. And people didn't attach the importance that they should have to it before. Now, there was a study done by UKZN here at the university in the province where I live, which shows that 75% of all men do not wash their hands after they've been to the bathroom. And everybody has the reaction, oh, men are so disgusting. But that same study showed that 69% of all women didn't wash their hands either. Whatever the reason was, whether it be a lack of access to running water, no soap, or it's a cold day and there's no hot tap, or we're in a hurry, whatever the reason is, people don't wash their hands. And on average, if you look at that, the percentage of people in the province where I live is on average 71% of people who don't wash their hands after they've been to the bathroom. And if they don't wash their hands after they've been to the bathroom, can you imagine what else they don't wash their hands after doing? And again, this is what exacerbates the spread of any disease, not just COVID-19. COVID-19 has brought particular attention to it because of the droplet spread. The hands have become a focus area because everything you do, you touch during the day. So people have just become more aware of it, not that it's any new information or that it's specifically COVID-19 related. Now, why is washing so important? The first thing that I'm going to do is apologize for my very crude paint drawing here. I cannot find a beautiful computer design scientific one that explains it nicely. So I have made one in paint, and it's the most obvious way why I can explain to you the importance of washing, whether it's washing your hands or cleaning your surfaces. So if you all look at this black area at the bottom, and that is the surface that you're trying to disinfect, whether it be your hands or an inanimate surface. If you look at the red, blue, and yellow circles that are sitting on top, those are the organisms that you're trying to kill. So we'll say the red are bacteria, the blue are viruses, and the yellow are fungi for this demonstration. Now, what bacteria do is they produce something called biofilm, which is like a slimy egg white type substance. They exude it over the top of themselves, and then that becomes a protective barrier. And if you've ever tried to get a broken eggshell out of egg white, you'll understand it just shoots around. It's very, very impossible to get it out. And what that means is that it's a protective measure. Essentially, it's their protective anchor. Now, bacteria don't selectively exude it. So they don't exude it to the point where they only cover themselves. They just continue to exude it. So when they're on a surface for a long time, that biofilm then spreads over the fungi and over the viruses that are on that surface as well. So they then benefit from the presence of that biofilm. And that is this orange layer that you're seeing on top here. If we then look at this brown layer, which is your dirt or your organic loading, it's the dead skin cells that drop off of people every day. It's the actual physical dirt, like we think of it, soot, ash, grime, soil, that we're touching onto surfaces. And that sits on top of the biofilm layer. And you now look at somebody with a hand sanitizer or with a disinfectant, that they come and they spray it on top because they're trying to kill those organisms underneath. I hope you can all see through the crude but very obviousness of this paint drawing how impossible it is for that disinfectant to actually reach the surface and kill the organisms. And that is why washing is so critical. Whether it's hands or surfaces, we need to remove both that dirt layer and that biofilm layer in order that the hand sanitizer or the surface disinfectant can actually have access to the organisms. And it's the part with surface disinfection and hand sanitization actually that most people get wrong, and that's what causes our infection control to fail. Whether it's in healthcare or whether it's in an industrial environment, is that people don't attach any importance to that cleaning step. Which brings us then to these beautiful protocols that we see, that we put up inside our facilities, whether they be healthcare or industrial, reminding people how to wash their hands. Now, there are a couple of steps in these protocols that are very, very important, that I'd just like to draw your attention to, because people tend to gloss over it and say, oh, I know how to wash my hands, or they've just watched a section on the news which shows that all the different steps, dorsal areas, to twirl your fingers around, rotate on your thumbs, and they leave the ancillary or auxiliary steps out of it. So I just want to draw your attention to this. First things first, removing jewelry before you wash your hands and your watch is very, very important. Those items provide crevices in which bacteria, viruses, and fungi can survive. If you don't remove them before you wash your hands, you will not have access to those areas with the hand washing products that you use. The second thing is to wet your hands thoroughly under running water. And what that means, all soaps are water activated. And if you apply the soap to dry hands, you will not get the ability out of it that it would necessarily have that will cut through that surfactant. So wetting your hands before you apply the soap is actually critical to the effectiveness of the soap in the first place. And it's something that people don't generally do because they don't want to put soap back onto the tap with their hands once their hands are soapy, or they, depending on water consciousness, they don't do that. However, unfortunately, in an infection control environment, it is important that those hands be wet even prior to the soap being applied. Then obviously we run through the steps of rubbing your hands vigorously, lathering the foam all over your hands, doing all the areas of your hands and wrists, between your fingers, around your thumbs. We've all been exposed to that very, very often in the last 3 months. The next one that I want to point out to you is thoroughly rinsing your hands. Soaps can be irritant if left to dry on your hands. So really, we don't want to do just a quick rinse. We want to do a proper rinse where we can see no more remnant of that soap left on our hands. We then want to dry the hands by means of a paper or disposable towel. Now, if you look at the fact that most disinfecting hand washes have a contact time of a minute, and you think to yourself, that's happy birthday sung through twice. You've listened to the infection control experts, you washed your hands for a happy birthday sung through twice, and your hands are beautifully clean and disinfected. And you turn around and dry them on a hand towel that hasn't been changed in a week and a half. You're negating everything that you've done by then, which means that the potential contamination level of what you use to dry your hands with is also critically important. And that's why disposable paper towels or single-use cloth towels will always be the most effective measure in infection control. And then obviously your last step is to dispense hand sanitizer on your hands. You rub it all over your hands and your wrist area, and only then do you put your jewelry back on. Now, that's essentially what we can do to protect ourselves now. We've gone into social distancing, we've gone into our homes, we know what our exposure potentials are. We can limit them. What do we do when we are exposed to people again? Whether it's now on our trips to the shop, or whether it is when we have workers coming back into our factory, or if, like us, you're deemed an essential service and you're continuing to function throughout lockdown periods, what can you do to prevent the resurgence of the disease? Okay, so as much as this picture makes me giggle, because it is a protective measure, provided that plastic is changed every day, we can't unfortunately wrap our whole lives in protective plastic. A, it would be incredibly bad for the environment, and B, human nature is just that we would use the keyboard through the plastic, which means the contamination would just sit on top of the plastic. And again, the risk assessor in me says, if we look at human nature, we look at everything that people are likely to do, and we take the laziest route of action, that's going to be the one that we need to prepare for. So we then come to another one of these protocols. Now, it's all very good and well, again, to have these, we stick them up on our walls, but people don't really understand the significance of them. And with a pandemic like COVID-19, understanding the significance of them leads to them being done correctly, because it's very, very easy at the end of a shift or at the end of a work day, your staff are tired. In this climate where it's just chaos all around us, it's very easy to disregard the things that we should do because we want to get home. We've had a shift change and we've got a mix of people, and always say we'll leave it for the next shift, whatever the case may be. If each individual worker understands the significance of why they have to perform a particular step, they're much more likely to do it properly, which is, for me, why understanding these is so important. So if we look at this first block, thoroughly clean all your surfaces. I've already shown you with my fabulous drawing why cleaning is so important. So cleaning at least once a day is critically important to the infection control that we practice. If we then look at step 3, the wiping down as depicted in the picture of electronic equipment. One of the things that often happens is that people don't want to disinfect electronic equipment because they don't want to wet it. However, the most simple step that you can do when you achieve this is to actually spray your disinfectant onto a clean, dry cloth until the cloth is damp but not wet first. You can then wipe down monitors, keyboards, credit card keypads, vending machines, touch screens, etc. And you can achieve disinfection even of electronic equipment without worrying about it. Obviously, we also have things like disinfecting wipes, and those can help in those environments as well. And basically what we're aiming for there are high-touch surfaces, and those should be disinfected on a daily basis or on a shift basis. So if you run more than one shift in a 24-hour cycle, it is very, very critical that cleaning and disinfection is applied between each shift. We need to look at areas that we don't normally pay too much attention to, like reception areas. Toys, if anybody has toys still out in reception areas, even GPs practices, etc. at the moment, they haven't really been watching the news too well. Shared magazines are not recommended in a pandemic environment. Only things where you can clean and disinfect on a daily basis. We then also need to pay attention to our waste bins. Now, normally a waste bin is out of sight, out of mind. People throw things away in it, and the only time they think about it is on rubbish collection day. So then the bin gets emptied and it goes outside. The problem that we face with a pandemic situation, particularly one like COVID-19, which is droplet spread, is that we have used tissues and hand towels being exposed and being disposed in those waste bins on a daily basis, which means they need to be emptied daily, cleaned and disinfected daily in order for that bin itself to not become a reservoir of the disease. And it's a mindset change that people have to think about, that a waste bin needs as much attention as the surfaces that they're touching every day. And then obviously, if you've got people who are working and you have somebody who, and bearing in mind the onset can come quickly. So a person can be fine at the beginning of a shift and sneezing and coughing by the end of the shift. So one of the things to understand is that if you're using the right disinfectant, if anyone is sneezed on, it is safe and recommended to spray the disinfectant directly onto the clothing. What that also does is it protects the worker's family from taking anything home with them. So as a matter of course, during a pandemic, anybody who is working and being exposed to other people should be spraying their clothing with the disinfectant prior to going home, so that they're not actually taking the disease home with them to their families. And in that way, we can prevent the spread, even for those essential workers who are still working. The last 3 here are things that we've already been exposed to in this talk, and that is, well, 2 of them are hand washing, hand sanitization, and then if people are coughing, the spraying of disinfectants into the air. One thing I do want to just point out to you, if you are making use of an aerosol-based disinfectant or a disinfectant that is sprayed into the air in order to try and minimize risk for your essential workers, is that the droplet size is very, very important, and it's very important that your disinfectant is exposed as long as possible. So if you are taking a disinfectant and spraying it into the air, you need to spray it as high up as you possibly can, so that it has as much time in the air as it needs in order to be exposed to those viruses and actually kill them. So definitely it's not a case of picking up your spray bottle or your can and spraying them at desk level or at machine level. They need to be reached up as high as possible, whether it's by human reach or whether it's over from a mezzanine floor if you have access to such, or on a ladder, anything like that, to allow the disinfectant particles time to filter through the air and actually then disinfect the air itself by killing the virus. And these, obviously, you can institute these now. I'm not saying that this is a protocol that needs to go into institution only once you reopen if you are on lockdown. What I'm saying is, if you follow this is what we call a pandemic outbreak for an office or a factory scenario. If you follow this, you will achieve the level of disinfection that is required in order to control the pandemic. So this is what I'm going to end with. It's something that I found, and it always gives me a good giggle every time I see it. But in light of the pandemic, it actually takes on a whole new level. So you think it's just a normal hand washing sign, but when you read it, employees must wash their hands before returning to work. All employees who don't will be thrown into an active volcano. We can now expand that out to hand washing, to surface disinfection, and to our personal space bubbles, our actions in terms of how we protect ourselves when we sneeze, etc. Because at the moment, an active volcano is probably equivalent to the whole world being exposed to this global pandemic. So that's where I'm going to end. If anybody has any questions for me now, they are most welcome to throw them at me. If you want to delve into more technical detail, please feel free. This is what I do on a daily basis. I'm very happy to answer left field questions. Other than that,
Okay, Mel, doesn't look like we have any questions at the moment. If any do come through during the course of Mark's presentation, we'll save those for the end. Okay, let's hand over to Mark.
Hi, Jared. Am I on? Hello, can anyone hear me?
Yep, you're on, Mark.
Am I on? Melanie, that was absolutely fantastic. I was riveted while I was watching that. In fact, I thought it was very informative, very educational. And I'm sure that there are going to be some questions that people might have for you at a little bit later stage. I'm going to, in the meantime, carry on with my presentation. And as I do this, I'm going to encourage, as I mentioned, encourage people to write down a couple of questions. We're from a company or an organization which is called Growing People Great. And just a very brief, this is not a selling thing at all, it's just who we represent. So we represent, I beg your pardon, 3 Wiley brands, being the PXC, the Everything Disc, and the 5 Behaviors of a Cohesive Team. And they're all over the world. We also represent a company called Genos International. And in fact, some of the things that I'm going to share with you today, a lot of that, in fact, comes from Genos International. Genos International is an organization that focuses on emotional intelligence. And you'll see in this slide here, 2017, 2018, and 2019, they were listed as one of the top 20 companies from an assessment and a training perspective by the Brandon Hall Group. And we represent them here in South Africa. Research shows that just the same way our health impacts us, so does our mind and our psyche. So from a psychological perspective, I think some of the things that we must remember is that you mustn't try and control the things that you cannot. I recall, I don't know if anyone knows a lady by the name of Mavis Hutchison. Mavis Hutchison used to run marathons. In fact, at the age of 56, she started running, and she ran across America. She ran the length of the United Kingdom. And she had a saying, and the saying was, don't climb the hill twice. And so if you can imagine running a marathon and you see a hill in the distance, and when you see that hill, you start climbing that hill emotionally, inevitably that starts to have a physical impact upon you immediately. And so she always said, don't climb the hill in your mind, as well as when you get there. And I think, if you look at COVID-19, if you look at the world in which we live, if you look at the changes that are happening, it is new, it is frightening, all right? And I think exactly what Mel said, we need to take care with regards to our health from a physical perspective, but I think we really need to take care of ourselves from a psychological, mental, emotional perspective as well. This here is the GENOS model for emotional intelligence, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but you'll see it's a step-by-step process which starts with self-awareness, awareness of others, authenticity, emotional reasoning, self-management, and positive influence. So that's the steps in it, or the process that is, I don't want to say followed, but you'll see on the right-hand side, you'll get productive states, and on the left-hand side, you get unproductive states. And the two areas that we're going to focus on are self-management and managing myself. Remember, I said that we mustn't really try and control those things that we can't. However, we can control ourselves, and we can only control ourselves if we are self-aware. There are various ingredients of change, and the 4 ingredients that I just want to mention is, number 1, in order to be able to change, and remember that change is the greatest power that we have. In order to change, the first thing that we need to do is we need to become aware of the fact that we need to. So if I don't know that I need to change, I never am. The second one is that I need to have the skills and the knowledge to change. The third one is the desire to change. And the fourth one is the habits which influence our actions, because it's only when I'm habitual in my new activity that it actually becomes part of me. So everything we know starts with self. Now, responses are normal, and that's one of the things that we must remember. So in this changing environment that we are exposed to, we must understand that it is absolutely normal to respond. One of the examples that I often use is if someone comes along and says, Mark, you're a bit of an idiot, and I turn to that individual, I might have a reaction. And I think it's normal to react. If you look at the world, if you look at the changes, there are events that are happening that we've never been exposed to before. And because of that, we are going to have a reaction. So please understand that to be emotionally intelligent doesn't mean that you're a brick wall or you're a robot. You're still a human being. And so there is going to be an emotional reaction or response. Now, there's 3 bullet points: what those responses are, how intense they are, and the duration of each response depends entirely upon us. So that there is the self-management side. Remembering that I have got to stop and take cognizance, take note of my initial reaction. And once I've taken note of that, then only can I start to think and plan my response and manage and control myself. If you look at it, this is the science of emotions. It's a slide from GENOS, which GENOS goes through fairly often, but just so that we understand it, you'll find that the event takes place. Now, when the event takes place, our amygdala is very aware of what's going on, and the amygdala is the fight, the flight, or the freeze part of the brain. And so that takes a note of what's happening, and it gives us a reaction. Now, if the reaction we choose is useful and rewarding, we know that that can actually assist us in being creative, more engaging, more lateral in our thinking. However, if we focus on that which is negative and we let that negativity dwell, and we have or manifest things like concern, worry, frustration, stress, that narrows our thinking, it limits our thought patterns. And often what happens is people get into states of mind, either a positive or a negative state of mind. A positive state of mind might be a very empowering process. Obviously, a negative state of mind might be disempowering. And when we say disempowering, what we mean is that a certain problem can come along, and in an empowered state, I can solve the problem relatively easily. But when I'm in a disempowered state, that very same problem can come along. And unfortunately, that problem now puts me into a state, or it can put me into a state of helplessness, etc. And remember, as I said, we choose those emotions. And to give you an idea, in the world in which we live right now, where if they refer to it as a VUCA world, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the VUCA world. For those that are not, VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And in this uncertain world, people make assumptions. And the sad thing with regards to assumptions is that assumptions are our reality. A couple of other negative, unpleasant emotions: stress. Stress often leads to people being aggressive, anxious. People become reactive. Worried. When people are worried, they become problem focused. And you know, that little quote where it says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. So if I'm focusing all my intention or all my energy on something which is a problem, inevitably it disempowers me completely. When people are fearful, often there's a blame mentality. But just as I said, we control those emotions after the initial reaction. We can also choose positive emotions. And, you know, when we have positive emotions, and I'd like to just put them all up very quickly, but when people have purpose, they engage with one another. When people feel valued, they care for others. When people are informed, they're solution focused. And when people are empowered, they innovate. All emotions are important and are important, pleasant and unpleasant. And remember, I mentioned that you cannot not react. So sometimes the emotions that we feel are going to be pleasant. Some of them are unpleasant. And we need to understand that emotions will occur. So we mustn't try and suppress emotions. We might need to control emotions, but we can't be unemotional. What is important to do in a crisis environment is to pay attention to how we feel and to act more intentionally with our emotions. I remember listening to a TED talk a couple of weeks back, and the individual that was speaking about thoughts being the language of the mind. And if you think about it, that's kind of true. Thoughts are the language of the mind. But the language of the body tends to be our feelings and our emotions. So how we react to the thoughts impacts our feelings and emotions. And those feelings and emotion impact our behavior, they impact our decision. And the important thing is to notice, and if you look at that third bullet point there, it says notice and intentionally act rather than allowing our emotions to take control. There is a thought that thoughts influence emotions, but just as there is a thought that thoughts influence emotions, there is also a thought pattern that our actions impact our thoughts. And so sometimes, and please, this is a very important thing that I'm going to mention now, is sometimes it is easier to act, and in acting, change the way that we think, as opposed to try and change the way we act by focusing on our thoughts. Sometimes it's very difficult to change your thinking, and I'm sure that people can appreciate and understand that. In fact, if someone had to say to you, control the way you think, difficult. If someone had to say to you, well, when a person's in an emotional state, control your emotions. I don't know about you, but often if a statement like that is made, people become more emotional. And so if someone's angry and say, listen, you need to control your anger, the person sometimes becomes a little bit more angry than they were. Now, if you look at resilience, and you know that is a topic which is a worldwide topic at the moment. If you look at resilience, resilience has been described as the ability to withstand, adapt, recover from stress and adversity. And here's an interesting one. Resilience is the opposite to fragility. So to be resilient is the opposite of being fragile. And, when we talk about resilience, you think about grit, you think of people standing up, people getting up, people fighting back, people changing. But the important thing is obviously to be in control of that change, to visualize that change and visualize where we want to be. Some of the sources of stress which result in resilience is change. So we know that the world is going through a huge change at the moment. There are challenges, setbacks, disappointments, and failures. And so usually any source of stress that we are experiencing tends to come from those things that I've just listed at the moment. Now, the important thing, as I said, is not to be reactive, but to be proactive. And in being proactive, this is a poll which was actually done by Genos a couple of days ago. And as representatives, we can fortunately use the same poll. So I'm going to give everybody a quiz. So I'm going to ask you, hopefully everybody's got a piece of paper. I'm going to put the quiz on the screen. And so if you've got a piece of paper, I want you to number it from 1 to 16. And I want you to score it. And I'll show you the scoring in a moment. So on the left-hand side, you're going to see, the questions are 1 to 16. And so I don't want you to write each question down. What I want you to do is write each number down and then read it carefully and answer it in a true or false fashion. Once you've done that, on the right-hand side of the page, you're going to see there are the 4 areas in which we can strategize. And the one, for example, is thinking, physiological, relationships, and environment. And if you look at the questions relate to each of these different areas. And if it's a true, I want you to tick it and then add it up. And obviously, you're going to have a score out of 4. And so I'm going to give you time to do that just briefly. And Jared will probably come in and out. But Jared, as people are doing that, and then this is the poll. The poll is you're going to look at those 4 after you've done the exercise, and you're going to determine, well, which 2 areas do I tend to focus on the most? So which 2 areas do I focus on the most? So I'm going to keep quiet now, and I'm going to allow you to answer. And then, Jared, maybe you can just tell me as people are doing that, and we can share some of the results. Jared, can you give me some indication of how things are going there?
Okay, the attendees could put up their hand when they've finished the exercise. Should be an option to put up your hand as you do that, and then I'll be able to let you know when those are finished. We have 2 hands up so far. Got a couple more to go.
All right, we'll just give a couple of minutes more, and then maybe we can, if you can just show the results of that poll.
Okay, what we'll do is, for those who have finished already, we'll put up the poll, and people can start putting in.
All right, just to inform people, I have received quite a few WhatsApp from different people saying that they've been bounced off or they've been kicked off Zoom, and so they are trying to join. They join for a brief moment and then they lose the link. So I think that that might be something which is having an impact on people at the moment. Jared, how are we doing?
Guys,
all right, I think what I'll do is maybe what I need to do is I'll carry on, and then as
we've got about a third of the people that have already polled. Just
all right, just to let you know where we're going to go from here, we are going to go through some of the proactive strategies that we can get involved in. And, you know, none of them are rocket scientists. We can think about it, we can probably imagine it, but I think it's very good to share certain ideas and expand on ideas. And here, please, if you do things which are impactful for your own self, remembering that every single one of us is a duck. A duck stands for we are different, unique, and complex. And because we're different, unique, and complex, not every solution is going to be the same for every person. And so we know that we're individuals. And because we're individuals, the proactive solutions are going to be different for different people. What might work for one might not work for someone else. And that is that's just life. Different exercise programs might not be good for different people. All right, how are we doing with that, Jared? Okay, I'm going to carry on.
We've got about half of the people have done the polling. Okay. So I'm going to end the poll now, and we'll just publish those results.
All right, are you going to show that to us now?
Yep. Just bear with us. The system is a little slow.
Okay, so there it is there. So if you look at it, thinking 29%, relationship 29%, but 43% physical. And here we go, the environmental, no one chose the environmental side. Physical That's the action, and I think action, it is an easier thing to focus on. I'm going to close that, and I'm going to carry on. So here are some of the things that people can do from a thinking perspective, and I'll go through them briefly. And as I said, please put comments, put any questions that you might have, put them on the chat, and we'll come back to it. Very important from a thinking perspective is create boundaries. I remember listening to a talk by Lucy Hone on resilience. And she said that the things that we need to be asking ourselves is what I'm doing now from a thinking perspective, is it helping me or is it harming me? If it's helping me, let me continue to do it. If it's harming me, then maybe I shouldn't be doing it. And this is a lady who lost her 12-year-old daughter in an accident. And she used to teach about resilience beforehand. And she said it was quite easy until it happened to her. And she lost her daughter in a motor car accident. And she said that if, for example, she picked up photographs of her daughter, she would ask the question, is this helping me right now? And if it was helping her in a way that made her remember her daughter in a positive light, then she would continue to do it. If not, if it was harming her, then she would pack the photographs away and put it away for a later stage. So I think it's very important to create boundaries and rules for ourselves relative to the thinking side of things. Here's a very interesting one, and we all know it: reduce how often you tune into the news or social media. I think working from home, more important than ever, we've got to limit ourselves to social media and choose the time when we want to go onto it, and not to be connected all the time. Gratitude reflections. Gratitude reflections, and this is the study of emotional intelligence, you'll find that the feelings of gratitude and empathy are the two feelings that can change and impact a person the most. You know, to reflect on that which you're grateful for, as opposed to reflecting on those things that we don't have. Diarizing thinking and reflection time. A lot of people are very good at keeping journals, and a journal is a way of getting things out onto paper. It's a way of getting things out of your mind, but also it is a very good record to have to look back upon maybe some difficult times that you've had in the past and how you've overcome those difficult times. Perspective taking. Anthony Robbins would make the statement in the comment, you know, when we face things, and in fact, Jim Collins would say, confront the brutal facts. Anthony Robbins would say, take stock and have a look at what or how critical it is, but never, ever over catastrophize that. So take things into perspective, but let's not become so emotional that we catastrophize and make things bigger than they are. A couple of others: listen to, sing, or play inspiring music. Some people might be able to sing better than others. However, when you're in the shower, you can sing to your heart's content. And now that we're on a bit of a lockdown, I suppose even those that are bad singers can sing, because certainly that does have an impact on the way that we think. Please take note there, it says inspiring music. Now, everybody's going to have something different when we speak about inspiring or what they consider to be inspiring music. But please, let's make sure that it is something which really does inspire us. Find things that make you laugh. Laughter produces endorphins. It produces the happy drug, which makes us relax a little bit more and easier. Here's a good one. Draw or paint. It's something which I started doing again after a long time, and I must say that it's very therapeutic when you do that. Allow yourself to cry. Allow yourself to cry. Allow yourself to feel peace and happiness. And I'm not going to spend too much time on each one of these, but those are the ones that we've thought so far of, that we have thought of so far. But if you want to add any more, please feel free to do so. We'd love to hear from you. So that's under the thinking side. Jared, I don't know if there were any other comments from anybody else, or any things that they might do from a thinking perspective.
Nothing at the moment.
Nothing at the moment. Okay, so obviously we have people that are very good listeners. All right. From a physical perspective, and as I said, I'm not going to spend too much time. Sleep better. Drink less alcohol and caffeine. Improve your diet. I think it's a good time for us to improve our diet and exercise most days. Mindfulness, meditation, have a smiling mind. They talk about a happy brain. Ensure that you start thinking about the present as opposed to catastrophizing the future or dwelling too much on the past. And there are some beautiful mindfulness exercises that people can do. Here's four or five more. Eat healthily. One of the interesting things, on Wednesday, I listened to a talk from Genos and some of the difficulties that people have working from home. And they said that from an eating perspective, it was easier to snack and eat all the wrong foods while they were at home. And so here again, it's setting boundaries for ourselves with regards to the food that we eat. And the suggestion was made also that we drink sufficient water, because often when you're at home, you don't drink as much water as you should. And so I'm going to have a little drink of water right now. Wear clothes you like. I know people in my organization that are dressing up and getting dressed in their work clothes and then going from one room to the next room. Establish a routine. I spoke about that. Yoga or stretching, physical labor. That might be a new one for some people. So there are a couple of things that we can do from a physical perspective, from a relationship perspective. And the relationship perspective, that's the one where we need to show empathy. And I think this is a fantastic time because we've got time to be able to continue to develop the relationships that we have with those people that we care the most for. And so it's very important, I think, at this time to set a relationship goal. Remember, a goal sets the future and helps us to focus on the future as opposed to dwell on the past. Stay connected with people, structure regular check-in times, have virtual breaks with colleagues, regular virtual interactions or small group gatherings. And that is something I know I was listening, Crystal mentioned to me the other day that she was meeting online via Zoom with a group who, during this time of isolation in many ways, they can buoy each other up and help each other and share positive experiences. And so I think that's a very, very good thing to do. Leaning into conflict, difficult conversations, I think that's a good time right now in order to have some of the difficult conversations that we need to. Difficult conversations, as we know, those conversations we should be having, but we kind of put off. Lovely one, play with children. Now, some of you I know have children that are adults, so we don't expect you to pick them up and throw them into the air, but certainly let's touch base with those people that are most important to us. Find ways to serve and help others. In other words, get the focus off ourselves and start focusing on those around us. Communicate your thoughts and feelings. Hug, hold, and demonstrate appropriate physical affection. And yeah, please take note that it is appropriate, especially in the environment that we're in. And as Mel mentioned, We probably need to disinfect before we do this, but I think it's imperative that we resort once again to physical touch to those around us. Now, relationships and physical, those two, I know those are the two that I find probably the easiest to do. Thinking is a little bit more difficult. And then the one that we have the least control over usually is the environment. And if you look at the environment, need I say that? Wash your hands more and avoid touching your face. Structure emails and call times. Don't let it just happen. A good book might be to read is The 4-Hour Week by Tim Ferriss. Doing something you love in the outdoors. And I know that some of us are prohibited because of where we stay. But I think where we can, we need to get out as much as we can. And fortunately, I've got a lovely garden, which I can make use of. And certainly, I will be getting out as much as I can. This is a very important one. Separate your workspace from other areas. If there are 2 of you or 3 of you, that might even be a little bit more difficult to do, because you might have a partner or a spouse who's also got to work from home. And so you've got to put some careful thought into that. Be open to not knowing. I thought that was a wonderful suggestion. Be open to not knowing. We don't have to know everything. And we need to accept the fact that we can't know everything that's happening about us environmentally. And secondly, not only don't we know, but we can't control it. And I think that's very important, to have an attitude and a mindset that we're open to not knowing everything. Seek counsel from trusted individuals. I think now's the time to select some people that you can speak to from a trust perspective. Trust being that vulnerability-based trust, people that we feel that we can make ourselves vulnerable to. Contribute to causes in which you believe. It's important to act now. Be open to inspiration. So Jared, as we were going through that, I don't know, did anyone make any comments with regards to some things that people can do in these various areas?
Okay, we had one comment coming through Sandy. He just said that there is a beautiful app called Insight Timer, which helps from the meditation and mindfulness perspective. It's got a lot of guided meditation and mindfulness practices and nature sounds and music and talks, etc., that are both good for adults and children. So she was just giving everybody a heads up on a really good app that we could use there, but nothing else.
Okay, thank you. And I think if you look at the Genos International side, from Genos, they have made available for free a whole lot of their material, which I think we'll get out to all those people that are on the webinar at the moment as well. So we'll make sure that you know, it's a way of reprogramming and rechanging or changing ourselves. You know, it's been said that, and this is science, I believe, that when a person turns 35 years old, they tend to be a sum of their habits and their thoughts before that. And the only way that people can change, truly change, is to change radically the thoughts and the habits that they have of the past. So I think that this time of reflection is an excellent time to be able to look, see what we do, see how we're doing it, and remember that if I don't create the future in my mind, if I don't have that vision which gives me direction, if I don't have that vision of a brighter future, then I tend to focus on the past. And it's imperative. The way to predict the future, they say, is to create it. And so I'm going to ask all of us to think about creating the future as opposed to just letting it happen. Empathy, I mentioned empathy very, very briefly. And what is empathy? It's getting out our own world and into someone else's world and feeling and thinking the way they do. And so it's getting out of our ego state into an empathetic state. This is an interesting one with regards to empathy, and that is we are all biologically equipped for it. We don't have to learn it. That it is something that is naturally there. It's not something we need to develop, and we just need to know how to engage our biology to demonstrate it. And so, once again, it's that self-awareness thing and reflecting and thinking and to pause and have a peaceful moment. What gets in the way of engagement can be inattention, resulting in a lack of presence and listening. And what they used to be called, or what in my day, I suppose, and Stephen Covey used to refer to it as empathic listening. I think people refer to it now as mindful listening. So it's listening in the present. It's listening to understand. It's listening to understand what people are saying as opposed to get our message across to them all the time. Judgment. Remember, these are the things that prevent us from engaging our own thoughts and perspective on what's being said, rather than focusing on how people are feeling. Often it's who's right as opposed to what's right. I know that a lot of you have seen this before, and we're not going to play this right now. In fact, I don't even think that we can. But this is something on YouTube that I would encourage everybody to watch and listen. And if you have watched and listened to it, maybe during this reflective time over the next 21 days, and we don't know how long it's going to last, but we know that for 21 days we're kind of housebound. Maybe to re-look at this and just refocus on how important people are to us. And as Stephen Covey says, first things first. So maybe we should look at the relationship above the result from time to time. Okay, now, as we were going through those areas and those proactive strategies that we can do in those different areas, maybe we can look at the next poll. And the next poll would be, well, for you as an individual, which, and let's do, instead of two, let's look at one. Which area do you think is the most important for you to focus on first? All right. So what's the area that you're going to focus on? So there, your psychological well-being. Two, we've spoken about the thinking, the physical, relationships, environmental. We've given you some ideas relative to those. So have a look at that. Choose maybe one or two things, reflect upon it, and then just, in fact, I see there it says which two areas. So which two areas that we've spoken about are you as an individual going to focus on? And once you've done that, let's share the poll once again. And Jared, I'm going to keep quiet, and I'm going to ask you to just tell us how people are going with regards to that.
Yeah, we're getting our first voting in. Just from my side, two things as you're going through that. You know, making time for gratitude is a huge thing from the thinking side, and just setting aside time, whether it's at the dinner table, whether you're getting your family involved. You can work on both relationship and thinking strategies when you get that in. Okay, we're getting quite a lot. We'll give another 30 seconds for the rest to vote. and then publish that. Okay. Let me publish that, share it.
All right. So 44% thinking, 44% environmental, 33% was the lowest physical side, but 56% was the relationship side. Right. And so the relationship, I think it's an absolutely wonderful time to think about all the relationships that we have, from a family perspective, from a friend perspective, from a colleague perspective at work, maybe even from a client perspective, those clients that we kind of relate to and get on the best with. I think it's a wonderful time to rekindle those relationships. So that's really, really good. I see that from a timing perspective, we've got about 6 minutes left, and I don't want to belabor the process at all. And so maybe if there are any questions, maybe we can open it up to questions that anyone might have, or comments, statements. It doesn't necessarily have to be a question. Anything that you guys want to add to anything that we've discussed so far today. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing this, and I'm going to go to the other screen. All right. Jared, I don't know if you can just share some of those with us and maybe even talk about it. I don't know if I've lost Jared.
Back.
Okay.
Okay. So there's Crystal just came up and commented that we've got multiple other applications that can help us, not just with the mindfulness, but with tracking our eating, tracking our physical activity, tracking our water intake and nutrition and so on. And then just a comment from Judy, just to thank you, Mark, for having the Zoom meeting. And you can just read there that you're always an inspiration to her, and so I'm just grateful.
Thanks, Judy. I've known Judy for many years. Very, very spontaneous, successful lady. All right. And I know that I've seen a couple of comments with regards to Mel, and she did a really fantastic job.
Yes. If any of the, just before we do close, if any of the attendees want to ask a verbal question, I can put your mics on now. Just put up your hand and I'll unmute you. But if not, then thank you.
All right, so we'll give it another 30 seconds or so, Jared, and if no one has anything to say, we'll just call it a day. I did hear something in the background. I wasn't too sure if that was someone that was going to make a comment. If not,
hello.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, yeah. So my video is off. It's Crystal. A question for Mel. You know, obviously as we said, we're in uncertain times. We don't have to know everything right now. But you know, talking about some of the things that, or looking at some of the things that you covered in terms of preparing from a hygiene perspective, how do we see this going forward? You know, so sort of at the end of the cycle, because you mentioned, you know, people are always going to look for the easiest way out. So if we look at post COVID-19, so post all of this where everybody's in isolation, how do we continue to encourage people to do, you know, to follow through on these steps, to prepare them for whatever might come after that? Just based on, you know, past or history with general pandemics, is that there's a roll around where people are going to start wanting to travel again and interacting on sort of more interpersonal levels than we have perhaps during this time. How do you see us basically rolling that out, not just in our homes, but in our public spaces and organizations?
And so there are a couple of things to factor into this. One is how seriously people globally and also here in South Africa take such measures as lockdowns. The more seriously people take them, the more likely we are to go to some format of life as we knew it when the lockdown ends. What we've got, the essence of the 21-day period is that it allows anybody who was exposed prior to it to develop their full symptoms and then come out the other side before the lockdown ends. If people restrict their contact and limit their exposure during that lockdown, then that 21-day period should be sufficient to allow each community to, for the virus and the infection, etc., to die during that time. If people don't comply, then it's another story altogether. One of the things that I'm already finding, and obviously as a manufacturer of disinfectants and hand sanitizers, our phones have been ringing off the hook for the last 3 weeks. I can't even begin to describe to you the chaos. But a lot of industries, for example, the automotive industry, the aviation industry, etc., are already planning the steps that they can do and the products that they're going to use, etc., for when the lockdown ends, to provide a 0 point going forward. So essentially, at the end of the lockdown, they are planning on the deep cleans, the disinfections, etc., such that when people do come back onto the premises, when life does resume some semblance of normality, we will be starting from a 0 point where there are potentially no infective agents on the surfaces. So provided people have been compliant, we should be able to then ring fence it at that point. So yes, basically it's going to depend on how seriously people take things. I think each industry will do what they can to contribute in terms of what they provide to each aspect of normal life. But it's definitely going to be down to the individuals who are going to shape the way that this thing goes. Because if you have any global community basically who doesn't comply, the minute we open international borders again, we are going to see a respread of the disease. So really everybody has to be all on the same page in order for us to bring this to a quick conclusion. It will come to a natural conclusion over time as people start to develop immunity to COVID-19, as our immune systems become exposed to it and survive. We will start to actually develop an immunity such that we will be able to be exposed and the consequences will be limited. So if we're talking 18 months to 2 years, that will happen as a natural result of the way viruses and our immune systems work. But if we're talking about a quick conclusion, that quick conclusion is really going to depend on how compliant people are, both within our close communities and within the larger global context. And I think we will find that governments in particular are going to be very, very careful about when they end lockdowns, when they reopen global travels, when they reopen the borders, etc., all because of those considerations. So we might start finding that our borders become open with compliant global communities and they remain shut to non-compliant global communities. So it's something we definitely will have to just watch and wait and see how it plays out. And if we are doing everything that we can ourselves and the people that we know are doing the same and everybody within our circles of influence is taking this seriously and then doing the necessary steps, then we're doing the best that we can in order to bring it to a relatively quick conclusion. But when I say relatively quick, I do expect 3 to 6 months.
Okay, and then also just the follow-up question. Great, that was a brilliant answer. You know, and I think we've all experienced this over the last few weeks of going to shopping centers, and you know, we're all very willingly putting our hands out to kind of be sanitized or disinfected as we walked in. And I came across some of the most interesting experiences where, you know, the smell of certain products, you know, there was no indication as to what I was actually putting on my hands was safe for me to use. There was no indication on the bottle what it was that I was actually getting myself exposed to as an individual. So how are we going to sort of regulate that industry? You know, you're in this industry with Sanitech. Is how do we, and you sort of regulate that what we're putting out there is also, you know, marked for not human consumption. Please don't go drinking anything, but for human use, is where we're not just happily accepting what is being put on our hands, or, you know, from a disinfectant perspective, that we're safeguarding ourselves even more, and not, as you said, we know that it's just, there is a barrier, and it's probably just a minimizer. And also having seen the amount of small business opportunities where people suddenly decide, well, now they're in the hand sanitizing business. How are we going to regulate that? Or, I mean, what do you suggest for those of us who are going out there looking for something to use?
Okay, so unfortunately, this is actually a very difficult question, because in South Africa, there are no regulations for disinfectants that are used on skin. So the inanimate surface disinfectants are all very heavily regulated. We have a body called the National Regulator for Compulsory Specifications, and they review all of our disinfectant products for inanimate surfaces, so non-living surfaces. They check our efficacy tests, they check our component chemicals, they check our quality measures, and that we are consistently testing our products, and they deem them safe and effective, and then you get a registration number which goes on the bottle, and that will have the format reg either Act 5 GNR or Act 29 GNR, depending on how long the product has been on the market. So that is how we determine that a surface disinfectant is both effective and safe. You will just have to make sure that the surface disinfectant is effective for everything that you need to do, because not all disinfectants are created equal, and you can get a disinfectant registered with just bactericidal kill, for example. So please make sure you read the labels of the products. As somebody who spends 90% of their time reviewing labels, please reward my effort. And when it comes to hand sanitization products, it's a free market out there. We have warned the Department of Health for years now of what was happening. They have proposed legislation which is going to make healthcare hand sanitizers medicines. So you've got essentially on one hand nothing, and then medicines regulations. So I suspect what we will see within the coming weeks, because believe me, they're well aware of all these illegitimate hand sanitizers, is we will see some form of regulation being pushed through with regards to quality manufacture, proof of efficacy, etc. I can tell you we've been supplying healthcare for 26 years, and I have not had an alcohol delivery to my factory in 2 weeks. In fact, I got notice this morning that the first one has arrived, and yet all these proliferation of hand sanitizers appearing on Facebook and in shops, etc., everywhere. So you have to ask yourself, why, as a quality certified healthcare manufacturer, I'm not able to get alcohol, but we're seeing hand sanitizers popping up everywhere. You need to start questioning the quality of what's actually gone into those. So yes, really there is no government imposed measure at this point. It will come. But for yourself, you're just going to have to try. If it just says alcohol in the bottle, it doesn't tell you which grade of alcohol, don't use it. If the label doesn't look professional, if the bottle doesn't look like it's professional packaging, and really just if you can do some kind of Google search on the manufacturer, and the manufacturer is listed and you can see their quality, that's really the only thing you can do at the moment.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, Mel, we got another question from Huli. She says that she's confused with the SA government ban on outdoor exercise when globally it is allowed. What is your take on this?
To be honest, I think it's what I was referring to earlier, where we have to take the route of the laziest of our components. I think it's a similar measure to that, is that essentially our government don't trust us to be in public spaces without interacting with one another. South Africans are in general very friendly people. And I think that is what they're concerned about, is that they're not concerned about individuals having outdoor exercise, but they are worried that if people are allowed to go into public spaces, into outdoor areas like parks, etc., to do exercise, we will not be able to help ourselves but to interact with other people.
Okay. Haley says thanks. Perfect.
All right. Excuse me.
Sorry, we do have one more question for Mel.
Right.
I know that we're over time, but for those who want to stay, this is Jeanette. She's saying, having my husband working in a retail store for the next 3 weeks is still nerve-wracking. What is the best to sanitize with?
Okay, I would just a hand sanitizer that has a 70% content of isopropyl alcohol or an 80% content of ethanol is one that is matches the WHO recommended formulation. And then obviously, just as I mentioned before, check the quality of the product that you're looking at, the quality of the label. Is the manufacturer actually listed? Can you find them if you do a Google search? If you can tick all of those boxes, hand sanitization shouldn't be a problem, and he should also wash his hands. And then a surface disinfectant of some kind, which he can just spray onto his clothes before he comes home, will also prevent his transmission to you.
Okay.
All right, guys. Mel, thank you very much. Everybody, thank you so much for attending. That was very informative, as I mentioned. So thank you. Much appreciated. And
Okay.
Jared, I think over to you. You can, I think, close the meeting down. Thanks, everybody.
Perfect. Thank you for all attending. Thank you to Mark and Mel specifically. Really, really interesting. We will have this link through to those who were on the webinar today, as well as those who couldn't get into the webinar for whatever reason. We'll have that link out within the next 24 hours. It'll be in your inboxes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.